Welcome to Chapter 6, The Flow of Food, Preparation. Let's look at some general preparation practices. When prepping food, only remove as much food from the cooler or refrigerator as you can prep in a short period of time. So if you have 20 pounds of chicken to dice up for a chicken salad, don't take all 20 out and let it sit out and get time temperature abused. Instead, just take out 5 pounds at a time. Do your prepping, cut it up, wrap it all back up, and then stick it back in the fridge and pull out more to work on. By returning prepped food to the cooler or cooking it as quickly as possible, you are preventing time temperature abuse. Also, make sure that your workstations, your cutting boards, and your utensils are clean and sanitized. Present food honestly. Do not use the following to misrepresent the appearance of food. Don't add food additives or food colorings to make food look and appeal more to customers. Don't use colored overwraps to make it look better. Lighting, sometimes restaurants will have poor lighting, and maybe it's not just for ambiance, maybe it's to cover the appearance of the food. Present food in the way that it is described. So for example, if you're offering fried perch, another fish should not be substituted. Sometimes restaurants are caught doing that, using a cheaper, less desired fish for something that, is not what they put on the menu. Food not represented honestly should be thrown out. Earlier we spoke in another chapter about corrective actions. I'm going to go a little deeper into it now. So food must be thrown out in the following situations. If food is handled by staff members who have been restricted or excluded from the operation due to an illness, that food needs to be tossed. When it is contaminated by hands or bodily fluids, such as from sneezing or nasal drip or any other type of contamination. When it has exceeded the time temperature requirements designed to keep food safe. And we've talked about that, and we're going to get a little deeper now. So sometimes foods can be reconditioned and restored to safe conditions. And I'm going to talk about some examples. What you would need to do for the corrective action would be to take care of the time temperature abuse. So you have a very small window, and depending on, what specifically you are trying to do, your window, could be smaller even. So let's look at hot foods. An example could be like maybe you have potato soup that is cooled to like 120 degrees. If you reheat it to 165 degrees to make sure that you're killing any kind of pathogens or bacteria that have grown, and then hold it at least 135 degrees or higher, then you have corrected that particular item. But as I said, that corrective window is not very big. As far as ServSafe is concerned, it is no longer than 4 hours. Thawing. Let's talk about how you would thaw food. I can guarantee you that most of your parents or grandparents have thawed food in an incorrect manner for many years. But we'll talk about, the correct, acceptable ways. When thawing food under running water, the food should be submerged under running drinkable water. And normally room temperature is about 70 degrees or lower. So use a clean and sanitized food prep sink. Use water flow strong enough to wash away food bits. Never let the temperature of the food go above 41 degrees for longer than 4 hours. So gone are the days where you could take frozen meat out of the fridge before you left for work, stick it in the sink or on the counter, and then leave it until you got home from work 8-9 hours later. That is not an acceptable way to thaw food. You have let too much bacteria grow on that product. ROP fish. We talked about this the other day. Frozen fish received an ROP, which ROP stands for Reduced Oxygen Packaging. It's like that shrink wrap where they get rid of all the air in it. Must be thawed extremely carefully. If the label states that the product must remain frozen until use, then remove the fish from the packaging. Now, personally, any type of fish product, I always leave frozen until the very last minute. I don't like fish is kind of funny. I do not like to let it sit for too long in an unthawed state. Before thawing under refrigeration, you should remove that plastic wrapper. Before or immediately after thawing under running water, that wrapper should be removed. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit to produce. When soaking or storing produce in standing water or in an ice water slurry, you should not mix different kinds of produce. So different items should have different containers. Keep all your celery sticks in one container, all your carrot sticks in another, keep your broccoli separate, etc. Multiple batches of the same item should also not be mixed. So if you have older stock versus newer stock, don't mix it. Refrigerate and hold sliced melons, cut tomatoes, cut leafy greens at 41 degrees or lower, and do not serve raw seed sprouts if primarily serving to high-risk populations. I have a quick story for that about being food poisoned at a Chinese restaurant that used raw seed sprouts in their fried rice. I got violently ill over that because it's a TCS food that they left out and it was time temperature abuse. So, and especially that's a danger to high-risk populations. All right, we're going to be talking about eggs and egg mixtures. Handle pooled eggs, and that's like, look at the bowl. Pooled eggs is what they call when you crack a bunch of eggs and leave them in a bowl. You should handle them with care. You should cook promptly after mixing and store them at 41 degrees or lower. Clean and sanitize the container used to hold them before making a new batch. So you shouldn't be reusing your equipment without cleaning and sanitizing it in between. That will keep your risk of salmonella down. Okay, prepping specific foods. How about ice? Make ice from water that is safe to drink. That's a no-brainer. Never use ice as an ingredient if it's been used to keep food cool. And sometimes we're guilty of doing this when we have a cooler at a party and you have drinks put in there or food. And then I've seen people scoop out ice out of there. That should never be done. Transfer ice using clean and sanitized containers and scoops. Those scoops should be stored outside the ice machine in a clean, protective location. Never hold ice in a container that has held chemicals or raw meats or seafood or poultry. And never touch ice with hands or use a glass to scoop ice. I actually had this happen to me. I was in a restaurant. I thought it was a piece of ice I was chomping on out of my glass. However, it didn't break. It was a piece of glass. So somewhere along the line, a broken glass was over by the ice machine, and I ended up having it in my drink. Very, very dangerous. Physical contaminant. Okay, we're going to pop in a little memory break here. I want to see how you do. Take a few seconds to think about it. I'm going to just pause here a minute, and I want you to see how you would stock this refrigerator or cooler. See how you do. All right, there are a lot of cooking requirements for specific different types of foods, and we're going to go over some of them, and you have in your notes locations to put these numbers. Minimal internal cooking temperature of all poultry, whole or ground, chicken, turkey, duck, etc. should be 165 degrees. Any type of stuffing made with fish, meat, or poultry should also be at that temperature. Minimal internal cooking temperature of beef, ground beef, pork, or other types of meat. Any type of meat that has been brined, like hams or roasts, should be at 155 degrees for at least 17 seconds. This is also the temperature that shell eggs that will be held. So if you're going somewhere and somebody's having a breakfast buffet, those eggs that are being held in that chafing dish should be 155 degrees. Let's look at seafood. Seafood including fish or shellfish or crustaceans. Sometimes you're going to have steaks that will be a rare steak or pork chops. Those need to be at 145 degrees. And if you have shell eggs that are being served immediately, they just got cooked, they're going out on, for service at that moment, should be at least 145 degrees. Roasts. If you have pork, beef, veal, or lamb roasts, the internal temperature should be a minimum of 145 degrees, which is a rare setting. When you're looking at plant-based products, so you have fruits or vegetables that may be roasted or slightly heated, grains such as rice and pasta, legumes such as beans and refried beans, the minimal internal temperature is 135 degrees. Cooking TCS foods in a microwave. You should cook meat, seafood, poultries, and eggs to 165 degrees. Follow these additional guidelines. Cover the food. Rotate or stir halfway through cooking for the cooking process. Let food stand for 2 minutes. Check temperatures in 2 different locations. So just to recap, what temperature should you be keeping hot food at? 135 degrees or higher. Keep cold foods at 41 degrees or lower. Check the temperatures regularly. ServSafe says at least every 4 hours. I say a lot more than that. I would do at least every hour. Because if you wait every 4 hours, you have used up your corrective action time window. If you are partially cooking food, there's certain procedures you need to follow. You should make sure that the par-cooked item is marked after the initial cooking. You should also make sure that it's stored separately from ready-to-eat foods. Restaurants and eateries are required to disclose if they have any raw or undercooked TCS foods on the menu. You will usually find it with an asterisk or a little message in italicized letters down on the bottom of a menu. So they need to make sure that it is in the footnote somewhere. This advises customers that when they order raw or undercooked TCS foods, it increases their risk for foodborne illness. There are several types of foods that should never be served to high-risk populations. Who are high-risk populations? Young children, the elderly, or people with compromised immune systems. You should never feed them raw seed sprouts as pictured. You should never feed them raw or undercooked eggs, meat, or seafood. So that would include over easy eggs, any kind of raw oysters and clams, things of that nature, or rare hamburgers. They should also never have unpasteurized milk or juice. How do we cool food safely? These are some factors that affect cooling. The thickness or density of the food. If it's a thick piece of meat, it will take longer. The size of the food, larger items, need to be made smaller. So if you're having a big pot of soup, breaking it into smaller containers will help aid the cooling process. Storage containers, believe it or not, using stainless steel, it actually pulls and transfers the heat away from the food versus plastic. Shallow pans that let the heat disperse quicker versus deeper pans. There are several methods for cooling foods quick. Sometimes we like to use ice paddles. That blue thing right there picture, that is an ice paddle that you stick in the freezer. It gets frozen solid. You put it in a pot or soup or any type of food that you want to cool down quickly. Also, you can use ice or cold water baths in order to quicken the cooling down process. Here are your windows for the cooling down process. Take a look. And finally, if you're reheating hot-held foods, you need to reheat it within 2 hours of 165 degrees or hotter. And that wraps